I also serve as Director of Program and Staff Development for the University of Kentucky's Cooperative Extension Service. First of all, on behalf of the regional reps, we want to thank you once again, and on behalf of the NAEPSTP board. We really appreciate your enthusiasm for wanting to partake of this webinar and have interest in this topic. As you can see, we have well over, it looks like, I think we had 150 people that were registered, but we are probably right around 80 people that are registered that have joined us here, and I'm sure we'll probably have a few more. But if you're like me, this programming effort was not on the radar, but here we are nonetheless. While we may not have been prepared a few months ago to focus on this specific topic, we can say with all certainty that we're now standing strong to support the communities that we serve. And today is not a testament of weakness or being reactive, but a sign of proactive strength and solidarity. And as we lean on one another, taking the opportunity to learn as well as take a chance to share best practices, we're here to really gather some thoughts, some insight as to where we go with the information at hand and how do we address the issues, because the whole thing around the pandemic is going to be with us for some time. It's a topic that even though things may level out at some point, and we hope that's sooner than later, we're still going to be dealing with the issues when it comes to finances, health, you name it. So we have a very distinguished panel for you today. The discussions are structured in a way that will take us through phases, in a sense, to bring preemptive issues at hand, to documenting outcomes and success, to telling the extension story so that stakeholders are aware of our efforts. So as you can see, based on the flyer that many of you have received early on, and you can see here on the screen, hopefully, we have a full agenda, and we want to be mindful of your time. So I would ask that you would keep your mics muted and use the chat box feature. This will be the best approach given the number of individuals that we have joined in today. So we will have our presenters, our panelists covering their topics, and we'll take a very brief break to check the chat box at the end of each panelist discussion, and then we'll also have some time at the end for further Q&A. So we're set for an hour, but our panelists have graciously agreed to stay on a little bit longer to answer any burning questions that we may have a little bit past that time. But again, please feel free to make sure that you get any early questions or thoughts that you may have into the chat box as soon as you possibly can. So with that, we'll get started. And first, we have Diane Mashburn. Diane is the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. She works with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture, where she serves as the instructor for program planning, evaluation, and accountability. She will be sharing information on creating new program focus areas that target COVID-19 efforts. Diane?
Thanks, Ken. And I have to slow down my own title too, so I don't feel bad that you did that. So as Ken said, I'm going to kind of talk about what we have done here in Arkansas in response to COVID-19 and some of the creative efforts. As many of you guys have seen, our agents and specialists have been amazing during this time in creating new efforts, and which has created some challenges for those of us on the reporting and accountability side. So I'm going to kind of talk about some of the things that we've done. So one of the first things, not one of the first things, but one of the big things that we did here in Arkansas is our communications department, not only with Extension, but at our division level, which encompasses our experiment stations, put together some amazing promotional campaign materials. As you guys can see, this is just one day's worth of materials that they provided to our folks to present on different platforms. So here's a few examples. So they would give the text to our folks, even if they were not programmatic staff, if they were support staff, they could still help promote the materials that we were generating in response to COVID. And generate traffic to all of our resources. Our biggest thing for us is to make sure that people realize that we were still on the job. We did some amazing efforts utilizing a couple of our extension folks here in Arkansas in translating these materials in Spanish. This is becoming even more imperative for us right now because as many of you have seen, there are some spikes happening again. And for us, it largely is in our Latino population. So making sure that that information is getting out to those populations is imperative. Our FCS department has put together an amazing website called Quarantine Kitchen. They have been putting together some great recipes to help people stretch what they go to the grocery store once a month if they're trying to really quarantine. Unlike most other states, Arkansas was one of those few states that never went under a shelter-in-place order, but we were recommending that our folks do that still, even though there was not an official shelter-in-place order. And so our FCS agents, our FCS staff at the state level worked to put together this material. And then our agents, this was an effort that was in the making prior to COVID. Many of you guys have seen this. So in the short amount of time that we've been sheltering in place, dealing with COVID, we've seen a lot of innovation. We've seen a lot of plans that we've had on the back burner for a long time get put into action really quick. And our agents, our FCS agents across the state, have shown that with our At Home with UAEX. So this is their Facebook page. They have done Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then they have links, of course, to our extension website. So they do live Facebook lessons. So this is their new one this week that they've started, their summer salad series, which sounds really exciting to me because I'm all for a nice colorful salad. But they've covered topics that are mainly FCS, but they've moved it. They've done that pivot that we have been asking all of our staff to do in response to COVID and in response to being to telecommuting. They have moved all this online. And then, of course, our community professional economic development has done lots for businesses. So right now, even with that spike, we are still in those phases of reopening. And so we're providing all kinds of guidance for our businesses to help them be able to reopen safely, reopen within the guidelines, and succeed as we try to reopen our economy. So some of the other things that we've done, so this is our employees page. Each of our program areas have been trying to put together resources so that no matter what area an agent is in, they have resources they can provide to our folks while we're telecommuting. So that's just a smattering of things here. So biggest question, me being the accountability person for Arkansas, I always get is where do we report it all and how do we report it all and does this belong under our area? What do we need to do? So, and then we're also getting requests from our lawmakers, our stakeholders. What are you doing in response to COVID? So some of the things that we put together was in response to some of our stakeholders didn't realize we had that much of a presence and we had information related to COVID. So we had to rectify that really quickly. So when you do something really quick, it doesn't always come out the way you want. It's not the most ideal. So this is what they came up with at first. I was not talked to about any of this form, but this was the form that was very quickly created and disseminated out to our counties. And this was required to be reported and turned in every single week. And then our poor district directors had to take this data and put it all together and send that information to our director and our VP for agriculture at the division level within for a short amount of time. So as you could see, and as you can imagine, the first time I saw this, I was just like, wait a minute. It's caused me heartburn because just thinking of all the information that they're having to plug in here and then all the information that they're going to have to then add together to create their not only their district totals, but then the state totals and then send it on whenever we have a system in place already. So I sent out a really quick email to our district directors, and I told them, I said, I can help you guys out with this. I can help you be able to streamline this a little bit more. And so what we did is we added COVID-19 to our internal reporting system. So our reporting system is called AIMS, the Arkansas Information Management System. And we were able to add a separate program area within our state plan of work, and then people could add it to their individual plans of work. There's just one objective underneath COVID-19 efforts, so there's no subdividing. But when you add a new program area and you need specialized reporting, you have to give some guidance. So in my true gold fashion, I made guides that outlined what belonged there and what didn't. So for us here in Arkansas, what went under COVID were those things that were specific to COVID. So I showed you the communication campaigns we put together, that kind of information. COVID specific resources, things talking about how to implement Zoom with club meetings and events and things like that. If it was a 4-H club meeting that they moved to Zoom, the actual club meeting would still go under 4-H. So that was our big thing, was trying to help people realize, okay, is this something you normally would do if COVID wasn't a thing and you just pivoted and transformed that program a little bit to be able to reach people where they were at home, or was it truly a new effort? So we had this added into our system. And a couple of things that we changed specific, and I'm not going to go too far into this because I know John's going to talk about how they've incorporated it into their system, but we cut out all of those direct contacts that couldn't be done face-to-face or could not be done social distancing. One thing, we allowed our ag agents to continue to do field visits as long as social distancing principles were applied. So we did keep that in here because we did have some field visits related to what kind of things need to be changed at their facility, at their farm in response to COVID. So there were one-on-ones specific to that. And then of course we kept our web-based instruction because that's where all of our instruction for the most part was going.
Just a few more seconds there, Diane.
Okay. So social media, as these guys are going to talk about, blew up too. When it came to, and this is where I'm interested in hearing what Rebecca has to say, the only indicators for the COVID area that we kept were these 4 in here. So there's not a whole lot beyond outcomes or outputs that we have been collecting. So we're kind of at that point of trying to figure out, well, how do we evaluate that? Some of the challenges I mentioned, helping people understand that not all contacts are direct contacts, even though in normal day-to-day they would be considered direct. Helping them realize definitions, rules for reporting have not changed, even though where we're doing things from has. And not everything we do is COVID. I have had to go back around to a few of our folks and go, yes, I know you're telecommuting, but that doesn't mean your entire 40-hour work week is COVID related. So, and like I mentioned, yet to decide how are we going to use this data for state, federal reporting and how we evaluate. So,
right.
I'm going to stop.
Great, thanks, Diane. I don't see a question in the chat box, but I did have one for you to just take a few seconds to elaborate on. Okay. So with the program areas, are they general topics in addition to what's already in the system, or did you incorporate those in some way?
So just general right now. So.
Okay. So they still had those other options?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks again. Now we'll move on to John Pritchard from the University of Maine. John is the program administrator for Maine Cooperative Extension Service. And I know we'll have a lot of people looking at this because he's going to be talking about the federal report process and addressing ways to adapt your reporting system to document coronavirus programming. John?
Thank you. Make sure everybody can hear me okay, yes?
Yes, we can hear.
Thank you. So thank you all for attending. And Diane, it was very interesting to see what you're doing. Diane and I have not compared notes, and there are a lot of similarities. So that may be a good sign. So I've been with UMaine Extension for over 25 years. And I've been involved with reporting system oversight for about the last 7 years. So yes, I was asked to take a look at how Maine has adapted our reporting system to capture COVID-19 activities. It's interesting because for so long, people have said that cooperative extension is the best kept secret. And I suspect this is true in other states as well, but in Maine, cooperative extension has never been more visible and more engaged and more appreciated than during this time. Extension has adapted in extraordinary ways in terms of program content, program delivery modes, the rapidness of how we've adapted. And if you think about it, if we didn't have this crisis, there's nothing good about this crisis. But if we didn't have this crisis, it would have taken us probably 2 or 3 years of committee meetings and processes to create the amount of change in program delivery modes, especially, and content that we've done in the last 3 months. So how do we capture the impacts and successes related to COVID-19? Some quick backgrounds. Maine is part of a Northeast consortium of state extensions programs. So there's about probably 8 or 9 state extension leaders in this consortium. And some of us have adapted what I'm going to be describing as our way to report. And I need to thank Stephanie and Steve, Vermont and New Hampshire, for kind of coming up with this scheme. Very simple scheme, actually. So the main reporting system is, I imagine, similar to other states. It's based on the logic model, and all of our staff report under 3 areas: positive youth development, Maine food system, and community and economic development. So I'm listing this as before COVID-19. This is a little bit different than Diane, I think. This is before COVID-19, and after COVID-19, it hasn't changed. We are still reporting under those 3 areas. How we are reporting has changed, but we haven't added any new areas or new focused areas at this time. So no change in our program areas at this point. So staff, when staff report, they're reporting on outputs, which basically activity and participant demographics, etc. Inputs as far as staff time, volunteer time, outcomes and indicators, and then narrative report. So again, how do we capture COVID-19 related work with these kinds of reporting areas? So we began, kind of like what Diane had shown, we began with this incredibly complicated system where we might completely revise our reporting system. And it was getting pretty crazy. And since I was going to be the one who had to make all the changes, I said, there's got to be an easier way. And I'll describe that easier way in a moment. But just two things that will help you understand the changes we made in our system. One is on the front ends, when staff report, whether it's outputs or inputs or narrative reports, whatever they report, they have the ability to basically click a box and associate their activity with a program team. So in Maine, we have teams such as 4-H programming, horticulture, master gardener, nutrition, etc. We have teams. So when staff report something, they can associate their activity with one of those teams Now, this sounds very similar to what Diane had, I think, shown. All we did was we created a new thing and called it a team, which is COVID-19. So no matter what staff are reporting, they have the ability, and I'll show you this in a second, they have the ability to kind of affiliate it with with COVID-19. What that allows us on the back end is our system is very searchable, and we can prepare reports on topics, programming, etc. It allows us very easily to do a search for COVID-19 and everything that anybody has reported on COVID-19. If they associated it with a team, will show up in that search. So again, just a couple basic adaptations in our system having to do with associating your activities to a team, COVID-19 team. And we also added, again, I'll show this in a second, we added a narrative report section. So that's an area where it's not about numbers, it's about impact statements more. So that gives the staff person the ability to expand and aggregate data on their activities. So this is a screenshot. I won't go into all the details because all of our systems are different, but this is a screenshot. Somebody's reporting on youth development activities. They would report the title of the program, the county it took place in, the number of participants, gender information, race and ethnicity. And at the very bottom of the screen, these are all pre-existing teams. And we ask staff when they enter their information, the very bottom of the screen, are there any of these teams that your activity is affiliated with? And this is before, and all we did was we added COVID-19 pandemic response. So some of this it'll be important to educate our staff to make sure they click this box, that they associate their activity with COVID-19. And it's a fairly simple thing to do.
John, you got about 1 more minute.
Okay, I'm just finishing up. And then the other thing we did under narrative reports, working from the bottom up, we've always had civil rights narratives, publications, economic impact, right up to success statements. All we did was we added one called COVID-19 response narrative. And that's open-ended. There's no guidance there. Basically, whatever you want to share about your activities and associated again with a team. And that's it. We did not make radical change. We kept it simple, and it's still a work in progress, but it feels pretty efficient at this point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. There was one question here, and I think it's for John, but Diane, you can listen up as well. The question says, can employees mark more than one team given that COVID activities may also be a program area? Well, it looks like there was a response to that now that I'm looking at it. I think they were sort of inquiring about how you have things set up there, John.
Yeah, I guess in my case, it would be associating it with a team would kind of serve that same purpose. So you might report under 4H, and then you would, at the bottom of the screen, you would associate it with COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And as well, you can also affiliate with horticulture, if it's a 4H project, and also horticulture, and also COVID-19. You can have all of those connected.
Gotcha. And we've got some other chats going on, but it looks like the participants are communicating among themselves there. So we'll move on to Rebecca. So Rebecca is an assistant professor and evaluation specialist for Washington State Extension. She's going to focus on strategies to document outcomes as a means to show impact of COVID-19 programming.
Hello, everyone. So as Ken mentioned, I'm the evaluation specialist, and as a result, when COVID-19 hit, one of the first things we did was started talking about how can we document what all is changing and happening throughout our system. So I'm going to walk through a little bit about what we've been doing and are continuing to do today. So the initial task, the WSU admin team, which I'm a part of, wanted to better understand how COVID-19 was impacting Extension. So things like how is work being affected, what has been the response in programming on both within the statewide program liaisons and faculty, as well as within the local offices. Also wanted to know how personnel was affected. So not just thinking on a work level, but also our people. What's happening to them, both on the work level and in their personal lives. COVID-19, as I'm sure you all felt yourselves, was a very a distressing time and continues to be for a lot of people. And so we wanted to know what was happening in people's lives so that we could figure out how to be more responsive to that. And then also what types of new and exciting things are happening. I'm sure many of you were implementing new stuff. And so we wanted to find a way to go ahead and capture that. So when I first started drafting questions, these were some of the questions that I had proposed to the admin team, primarily looking at our top 2 administrators, because they're the ones who would be needing to report things back out to the external and internal stakeholders. So questions like, how has COVID-19 affected this program or project? What has been Extension's reaction? What is being done differently now as a result? What activities are being undertaken? Have there been any expenses associated with this response? I had some questions in there about outputs and capturing numbers and things like that. So we went from this and we ended up with 3 final set of questions. And we did it only 3 for a reason, and that's because we were looking to capture information each week. So the first question we asked people to respond to was, please provide a brief description of any COVID-related activities, products, and or deliverables that you have created or implemented. Then we wanted to know, please provide a brief description of the COVID-19 challenges you're facing. And please provide a brief description of bright ideas you have about addressing COVID-19. These can be ideas you either have or have not implemented. So we went from having a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions to all qualitative, which put quite a bit of onus on me when it came to the analysis. But the reason we went here was because, number one, we wanted people to feel as if they weren't restricted in any way. So they didn't have a set of specific things they might be doing. Instead, they could talk the entire gamut. What was bubbling to the top for them? What was most important? This allowed us to figure that out. When it came to challenges, I'm sure there are some people in the world, well, I know there are people in the world who lived through, for example, the 1918 pandemic. Likely they're not working for Extension. So we didn't want to, again, sort of set boundaries on what types of challenges might be. And when I sent out the email making the survey request, I put in there that people could specifically respond to either personal or work challenges they were facing. And then the bright ideas, this concept that we really wanted to say, there's new and innovative things happening in Extension all the time. We don't always communicate that well, both within ourselves as well as outside. As was just mentioned. And so these were the 3 that we started with. And we immediately began reporting back out. So there wasn't a lag. Oftentimes when I do an evaluation, we take a couple weeks, we collect the data, we analyze it, we create a report, we get it back out. None of that was happening. Everything was moving very, very quickly. So each week, We started with week 1 and 2, kind of combined them together, and immediately chose a top 10 to highlight for the top administrators. And the reason we did that was because I was receiving multiple qualitative, open-ended responses, and there was a lot of detail in there. So although I had the time to go through a spreadsheet and kind of get at all of the analysis, not everyone else did. So my role was really to kind of narrow it down so that we could really focus on what were the top things that were being shared. And how could those be quickly put out to our social media, to our communications team, to administrators outside of Extension, to community members, so that they could see Extension's offices were closed because, unlike Diane, Washington State had a stay home, stay healthy directive, and that meant every single one of us left the office at the middle of March, and most of us still are not back. And so we needed to make sure that communities understood what we were doing. And then each week I also reported out a different set of responses or materials to all of Extension. So I have never used the Extension listserv as much as I have through this process. Number 1, it was used to convey important work. So I was talking about, what are your colleagues doing? What types of things are they sharing? What materials are they giving? I had people send me any additional things they had created to share either with their community or with their like local colleagues or local community members, so that people could then take that and maybe jump off of it, not constantly recreate the wheel. And it also increased buy-in. Usually when you're asking people to do a survey, you're not asking them to do it every week. It's a lot. And I'm really pleased to report that over the last 10 weeks, I have over 300 responses from people around the state. So that's been really exciting, and also slightly overwhelming. This is just a quick example of something that I would have attached to one of the emails. In this case, I did some coding and some analysis on what are the activities, products, and deliverables. So that was the first 5 weeks. Collected the exact same set of questions, sent out the email every Thursday afternoon so that people could think about what they did for the week, what was upcoming, things like that. At the start of the 6th week, I added in a results-focused question. When we initially started this, administration really wanted to know, what are the results, what's happening? And I had to sort of explain that we needed to take a step back and people had to implement things before we could actually get to results. So we could collect outputs, but we can't collect outcomes after a week or 2. It was just too quick. And this is even a pretty quick turnaround for collecting outcomes. But I added a question saying, please provide a brief description of any results that have come about because of your COVID-19 activities, products, and or deliverables. And the email included additional details to clarify. So things like, I wanted people to think specifically, maybe participants in an online class that they collected evaluation data from, or more general things, stronger internal or external networks. That concept of, we want to know not just what you're doing, but also what's happening as a result.
Rebecca, you got another minute.
Yep. Good thing I'm on my last slide. Thanks, Ken. And I'm really pleased to say that we've collected really powerful outcomes as a result. So this is just an example, and full disclosure, this is probably the best one I received, which is why I'm sharing it, because I got not only a lot of details about who the partners were, but I also got a picture of everybody's most people social distancing and wearing masks. On our west side, we have some isolated counties in Western Washington, and they actually did a collaboration with the Makah tribe as well as Extension and several other food banks, and they delivered over 1,200 pounds of frozen Washington caught fish. And so it was a really very large outcome that happened as a result. And this is just one example. I mean, our outcomes ranged from very small and specific to much broader. So I'm excited, and obviously this is still being collected. I'm still making this ask every week, and we will continue to report back out so that people understand that this data is being used in our federal plan of work. It's being used in our federal reporting. It's being used in social media and other ways, both external and internal to Extension.
Awesome. You did have one question, Rebecca. Could you explain more about what the top 10 was for top administration?
Sure. So all of the responses that were coming in, some of them were very simple and just said something like, we're meeting more on Zoom, or we're using Microsoft Teams. Others were much more specific, where the activity, for example, one of our 4-H faculty created a virtual online statewide horse judging competition and implemented that. So someone who could provide a very large descriptive information about what either the activities they were doing or the results they had or whatever it may be, those were the types of things that I was sharing back with admin so that they could then take that and use it in a report or to talk to our dean and our directors and things like that. So I kind of picked the cream of the crop to share.
Great. And there was also a request to have copies of the slides. So if you just want to put your email in the chat box and
Sure.
people can follow up with you directly.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Next, we have Danae Wolf, and Danae is an educational technology specialist with Ohio State Extension. She will share tips on assessing reach, engagement, and impact of digital content.
All right, thank you so much, Ken. So we're going to dive in with sort of a fast and furious sort of impact, reach, and engagement concept map or framework for how to kind of teach faculty and staff in Extension how to think strategically about digital engagement. So our learning and org development unit here at Ohio State, over the last 3 months, we've been providing near daily trainings. Like for the first 12 weeks or so, we were doing trainings every single day of the week on a variety of different skills and competency development, mostly focused on development of skills in digital content creation and dissemination and evaluation. And what we started to recognize is we could teach skills development all day long, but people still weren't connecting the dots on the strategy piece. So people could develop content and they could deliver that content, but there wasn't the why behind why they were actually delivering that content on that specific platform. So we've kind of had to retool and kind of re-strategize how we're thinking about this. We're finally starting to have these more holistic and cohesive conversations about how we do this. So I'd like to start with sort of a simple engagement framework that we've been using to kind of teach about what engagement looks like. And while we're talking specifics on digital engagement today and over the last few months, this is just as relevant to face-to-face programming when we can get back in that realm as it is to the digital engagement world. So this LIFE framework, or this LIFE model for engagement, stands for learn, interpret, frame, and engage. And within this whole process, we have evaluation built in. So rather than thinking about program development as something that exists in this silo, and then evaluation as something that exists in this silo, eval is really meant to be fully intertwined into the program development and design and implementation process. So in order to strategically meet the needs of our audiences, we have to know what those needs are. And if the last 3 months have taught me anything, it's that we are doing a lot of programming without asking ourselves the why are we doing this programming. So because people are sort of trying to retool themselves with digital content competencies, they've been inviting extension staff, like our LOD extension staff, into their planning meetings so that we can provide that digital strategy piece. And when we ask them who's the target audience, what's the identified need, what are the objectives of this program, we get a lot of blank stares back. We get people saying, well, I don't really know. We thought that this was a good idea, so we're doing it. So that's why we're trying to provide this robust strategy piece. So the first phase of this is we learn who our audiences are, what are the opportunities and challenges they're facing. We take all that information, then we interpret it, and we answer the why. Why do our audiences care about this information? This is a pivotal stage that I feel like is often missed in program development, because sometimes our audiences don't even know that this topic impacts them. And we sometimes have to figure out the why for them so that we can feed them content that pulls them into the conversation that they would have never otherwise been a part of. Then we frame the content. We're able to say, this is why this piece of content affects you. And again, that pulls them deeper into that conversation. Once we've laid that framework, we can finally start to think about the engagement strategy, the platforms and the specific pieces of events or content that we are going to build out to teach these audiences about these tools. I'm going to pull up the chat here in case we're getting questions. So one thing I would like you to think about is that when we receive the answer that our target audience is the general adult population, that's not a target audience. That's like the exact opposite of a target audience. And when we design content for the every person in mind, we're actually designing for no one in particular, which leaves us with a lot of watered down content. So that's why going through that sort of audience-centric and solutions-based engagement framework is really important, so that we know and can answer the why. So now, how does this all relate to that impact, reach, and engagement piece? What do we evaluate? How do we evaluate it? So this is what we call this sort of this path of engagement. I like to frame it as more of a web, because there are various entry points. It's not super linear like a path is. So visually, I usually explain this as more of a web of engagement. We need to first create awareness about a topic. And the tools that we use to do that are probably going to be different than the exploratory experience tools, or the deep learning tools, or the advocacy tools. And the questions that we ask to evaluate the impact of each of these is going to be different too. So we first have to create the awareness around a topic. And then we invite people into an exploratory experience, or a trial experience. This is sort of their like stage of trying us on for size to see, is this something I'm interested in? Is this relevant to me? And then we pull them in, we continue to engage them and pull them into deep learning. And then finally, we provide opportunities for them to become advocates. So how does this relate specifically or align with impact? As far as the awareness piece goes, we might not be evaluating for impact, but what we're doing is we're evaluating for reach and engagement, which isn't true impact. It's just reach and engagement, which tends to just look like numbers and data. It's the number of people that came to the program. It's the number of followers we have on Facebook, the number of email subscribers. It's not true impact, but that's okay. Because if we don't make them aware, if we don't capture their attention, we will never pull them into the exploratory experience, where we can start to actually evaluate for things like change and awareness, which is a short-term impact. As we pull them deeper into like the deep learning, we start to get that change of behavior that we can evaluate for. And then finally, the advocacy, when we can actually start to evaluate for change in conditions. So in the few minutes that I have, do I even have a minute left? Ken's like, yes, you have one more minute. So what this looks like in practice is, if you're measuring for awareness, you might use tools like social media or a podcast or an email. And again, you're measuring numbers like reach and engagement. And then you're strategically leading people to an exploratory experience. And that might be something like a webinar, a workshop, a mass texting campaign, or even a fact sheet. That's when you start to ask the right questions to measure that change in awareness. Then you pull people further strategically down that engagement path into deep learning. This might be sign up for this online course, become a part of this online cohort through something like a Facebook group where we can have more deep, robust conversations. It might be read this online book. It might be watch this video series. And that's when we start to equip people with the tools and skills that they need to actually change their behavior. And then we start to evaluate for that change in behavior. And finally, we have to give people those opportunities to actually become advocates of this work. So this means volunteer programs, 4-H, Master Gardener volunteers, Certified Volunteer Naturalist or Master Naturalist. It could be donor opportunities. It could be legislative advocates who legislate on behalf of Extension so that we can increase and keep robust our budget so that we can continue the great work that we do. All of this has to have some strategy behind it in order for it to be successful. And we have to stop siloing these content pieces out and thinking of them as existing individually or independently, because they don't. It all has to be one part of, or one big like portfolio of events and products that we create and disseminate as part of a broader program development and evaluation portfolio. That was a lot of information. So feel free to reach out with questions.
Good job. So of course we're getting comments about providing slides, and I did post your email in the box there. So you can request those from Danae. I'm sure she'll be glad to send those. Danae, you gave us a good example of why we need to take a look at our logic models, those traditional formats that we use, and very interactive way to take a second look at those. So thank you.
Sure thing. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. And so we can't end without the understanding of how to package all this together. And we have two colleagues from North Carolina A&T that can do just that with their expertise and sharing. We have Courtney Henderson, who is a public relations associate, and Kelsey Merritt, who's a public communications specialist at North Carolina A&T.
Yes, hi everyone. So what Kelsey and I are going to be speaking with you all about is a little different than what our colleagues previously have spoken on. They're more so talking about the programming side and kind of looking at the impacts and things of that nature. But what we're talking about is kind of how do we put that all together and how do we show people that Extension is still active even during COVID-19. So I'll let Kelsey go ahead and get started with that.
Everyone, again, my name is Kelsey Merritt. So we were tasked by our Associate Dean and Extension Director to come up with a strategy to make sure that during COVID-19, cooperative extension at A&T was still very visible. Like Washington State, North Carolina has been under many stay-at-home orders. We've also been on curfews and things of that nature. We can't have any in-person programming. So we wanted to ensure that our programming was still happening virtually. So we came up with the strategy Extension Extended that would address exactly that. So we came up with several strategies to make sure that this happened. So a couple of them, some major ones was the Learning with Extension, and that helped provide indirect education. So we were still making sure that programming was happening, though it wasn't direct education, it counted as indirect education. We had some extension open mic, so that allow our residents of North Carolina to ask questions to our specialists as well as agents, providing solutions and solutions unleashed to the residents of North Carolina on how to do on problems that to be addressed during COVID-19, home connections, so how to maximize your time at home, optimal moments. With COVID-19, it can be very stressful. It could be a lot to deal with. So it's creating opportunities to let the citizens of North Carolina get that off their brains. And then North Carolina Connected was just giving resources and information about things that were happening in North Carolina. So that include farmers markets and things of that nature.
And the great thing with Extension Extended is it's not just a social media campaign. It's also a virtual platform across many different, the website, even with our social media and our virtual programs. And the really cool thing about this also is that with North Carolina A&T, our extension is the largest outreach arm. So the leaders of the university were kind of looking at Extension to provide those resources for community members and just the general public. So our specialists really set the bar high with providing those fact sheets that we're talked about, providing those trainings that we're speaking about. And so we have a whole slot on the website where it's literally just extension related COVID-19 resources, and they're all published by our specialists, some of our field agents. And so it was a great opportunity for our people to showcase their talents and to also bring this to the forefront during COVID-19. The worst thing you can do during a pandemic is not to be present. And so this virtual campaign kind of came into play and allowed us to put our foot out there and let people know if you're looking for solutions, we have them for you. So I wanted to share with you all some of the virtual programs that we have done, and I'll just share a few because we've had many. We had a whole month of them in May, and then we have some in June, but I'll just share some of the topics that we addressed, and all of these were facilitated by A&T employees, either with the College of Ag, with Extension, or some of our field agents. So we started off trying to focus on the different tracks. I think Danae hit on this, and it was a very great point. You have to make sure that you're reaching people in what they need from you. So our small farmers, but also thinking about our parents who are working from home, but also thinking about people who may need those stress-related tips because of COVID-19. So we started off with coping with the impacts of COVID-19, gardening in place, raised bed gardens, off-centered self-management strategies during COVID-19, garden safety. And so we had two different tracks. So one was more so COVID related, the other kind of focused on the ag related things. And then we also dipped into the FCS. And so we tried to make sure that we touched on each topic, and we didn't necessarily ask up front, hey, what do you guys want to see from us? But we focused in on our program areas and ensured that each and every time we were providing a virtual program, it was something that the people would be able to pull from our different various target audiences that, like they were mentioned before. So it's been a very great turnout. We actually have been doing some of the evaluations that were talked about, but because we're in communications, we do have a department that specifically focuses on that. And so with Kelsey and I, it's just more so pulling it together and branding it, making it look good, selling the show, so to speak, and making sure that our citizens know that we are there for them and that we're here to provide those solutions to the issues that are surrounded with COVID-19.
So though, with the evaluations of the programming, we do evaluate the success of the strategy. So we are keeping track of it through social media listening and using some of our social media management tools. So Courtney manages the overall Cooperative Extension social media platforms, and I am more on the nutrition education side with FNEP and SNAP-Ed. So together, you can see some of the engagement numbers on both, and these are plain Extension Extended posts, because we're still implementing our social media strategies that were created prior to COVID-19. So yeah, some of our engagement and reach and impressions to see. So we are very pleased with the outcome, and it's still going on.
Yes, and so what we're trying to continue to do with Extension Extended, of course, is to brand it surrounding COVID-19. But let's just be clear, even if it's not COVID-19, something else will happen in the future. And we want to ensure that the first thing that people think about is, let me go to Extension, let me go to their website, let me go to their social media, let me see how they can be helpful, because they came through for us during COVID-19. So we need to make sure that, you know, in the future, we know that things will happen. And I think Kenneth spoke about being proactive and not reactive. And this is a great starting point for us. And I think that futuristically, we will be able to implement similar programs for future mishaps or whatever that may happen in the future. And I think the biggest challenge for Kelsey and I is to make sure that we're not COVID-19 just, you know, stressing people out with it, making sure that we're pushing it, but we're also still implementing our social media strategies that we had beforehand. And so that has definitely been a big challenge, but just looking at the impact that we've had so far as our virtual programs, our social media, we are definitely very, very pleased.
So I see a question from Jennifer about defining engagement, reach, and impressions for social media. Courtney, do you want me to start and you tag along? So engagement is basically interacting with the audience. It counts as a like, it can count as a retweet or a share, reactions on Facebook, as well as comments. So we want people to be sharing our content. We want them to be asking questions, and we would interact with them. So that all counts as engagement. Reach is how far a post or content goes. So reach can include from us personally, the original content, but it also includes if we are shared. So if another extension agency in another state shares, the people who they reach is included in the reach for that specific post. And impressions is just how many eyes have been on the post. So impressions can count for people multiple times. So it's the amount of times that somebody has physically seen the content. I hope I answered your question.
Right, and we actually use, and I'm not sure if everyone is familiar, we use Sprout Social to kind of pull some of those numbers, and we also, of course, use I like Facebook Insights a little bit better in some ways. And so the numbers, as Danae mentioned before, may not be as important or as impactful, but we do like to see those, because if they're lower in some areas, we can always grow from you know, those numbers. And so I definitely think it's important to look at them, but not let them scare you. I think sometimes we can let those numbers scare us, but we also have to look at the impact of what people are saying. Are people replying to our surveys? Are they enjoying the work that we're putting out? And so the numbers are important for sure, but also looking at the other ways that people are interacting with our materials.
I just posted Courtney and Kelsey's email there. There were a couple of questions about slides. So, and I just mentioned to someone else that all panelists are prepared to send those out. Since we've got so many people on the call, and I don't have emails for everyone that I'm noticing here, so it's just best for you to contact the panelists with that request. So, all right, so we're looking here to see if we have any other questions. There is one here for all panelists. It says, has anyone seen or asked NIFA for guidance on collecting and reporting program data related to COVID-19? Demographic data on virtual engagement contacts is a bit of a conundrum. Any best practices?
I'll just say I have not reached out. Catherine, I was about to say that somebody needs to reach out to Lynn and see if there's any guidance. Our folks are constantly asking about demographic data. So we're, of course, saying only collect it on live. So Zoom sessions, viewed and participating live, Facebook Live, if there's a way of doing that. And we're trying to encourage people to incorporate demographic data collection in registration forms for Zoom, follow-up surveys on, we use Qualtrics for ours, or possibly even using chat and using private chat through whatever means to try to collect that information. I'm trying to work with our civil rights compliance officer to make sure that we're following all the guidance needed to do that in a non-invasive manner. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
And I'll agree with Diane. For our virtual programs, we have been utilizing Qualtrics to collect some of that data, and then on Zooms using the poll feature to collect some of that data. But other than that, those have really been our main sources of getting that information.
Anyone else? I know we're getting close to the time, so I wanted to go ahead and put the link to the evaluation and also the QR code there. So please take some time before you leave. I know we're losing some folks. Provide us some feedback on this session. So.
The link is now in the chat as well.
Thank you. Okay, there's another one here. Have your university central administration been good at helping to promote what Extension has been doing during the pandemic? Good question.
I can start with that. Our central administration at North Carolina A&T has been phenomenal with sharing Extension information. In fact, they were the ones who requested that there be a separate website for just COVID-19 resources and materials. So they put it on the website. We have our own web page or link that goes to those resources. The social media manager of North Carolina A&T shares the information, and the information is sent out for virtual programming on the internal listservs and university communication. So they have been very supportive in sharing our information.
Yes, and our Chancellor Harold Martin, is a huge fan of social media. So he has been resharing and retweeting anything that we put on our Twitter about Extension Extended. He has been super supportive, even on his personal pages. So we have been very lucky there.
I'm backing up here. I'm trying to make sure we didn't miss any. One that I don't think I read already says, how do you all coordinate evaluation efforts between all counties when programming differs county to county?
Can you repeat that question again?
How do you all coordinate evaluation efforts between all counties when programming differs county to county? That is a big challenge. And so I think one thing that we try to do here in Kentucky is we have what we call major programs across program areas. 4-H has their specific major program areas, FCS, ANR, Community and Economic Development. And so we try to provide evaluation tools and logic models for counties to utilize. So that way, and I'm pretty sure this is similar in other states as well, but when you've got a common evaluation tool or a common measure per se, even though you may be working with a different audience, your audience may be smaller, demographics may vary, you're still gathering data consistently across the board because they're using that same evaluation tool. And when it comes to something that's specific to COVID-19, again, counties are all across the board, and we encourage them to make sure that they're focusing on their local need. We're not going to try to force counties into a box when they don't have an issue that another county has. So we want to make sure that we keep that flexibility and maintain that grassroots approach. But we do have one project that many of our counties are doing that is, different counties call it something different, but it's really grab and go, where they have activities in a bag for youth in the household. They may have some tips on nutrition for families. And so the counties are providing those. They're sitting them out in a place that's accessible where people just come in, grab and go. But we also are including a link to an evaluation that's consistent across the board, asking the same questions just to see how that information is benefiting them. If youth are developing new skills based on the activities that they're offering, or the families utilizing the recipes and that type of thing. So you really have to, kind of play it by ear to make sure you're striking that balance between, looking across the board and gathering data consistently, but still at the same time letting counties know that they have some flexibility in impacting locally. But I think as many of us are evaluation specialists and working in the area of program development, we have to be sensitive to that. We may get 5 or 6 calls in a day, and the counties are, the objective may be the same, but they're doing something different in all 5 or 6, 10 counties. And so that's just a response that we have to be sensitive to. Okay, we've got several to jump in here, and if you all let me know if I miss one. Is anyone using Microsoft Teams as forms and for registration, I believe that is? We're just getting on the Microsoft Teams bandwagon. No one else? We're moving from Skype to Microsoft Teams. And it may change. You know how it is when those university licenses roll around, 2 years, 3 years, and here we're off to the next new thing. But right now it seems like Microsoft Teams is what we're moving towards. And, of course, it's going to be a learning curve for us. But so I'm assuming I'm the only one there.
We're just starting as well here in Arkansas, so we don't have experience with it yet.
Yeah.
We're using it, beginning to use it more in Oklahoma as well.
Yeah. And it looks like some other folks have responded in the chat, so thanks for sharing that. There was another one. Is anyone experiencing budget cuts related to reduced university revenue? That's probably the norm right now. Working with less is the name of the game right now. Anybody want to share any challenges that, maybe some adaptations that you had to make because of that? I know several of you were like us. We had some positions that we were hoping to fill and we can't fill them now. I see a couple of folks nodding their heads. I saw some announcements coming from different states over the past couple months. We were looking for the same or similar positions, and we may be in the same boat. Anybody else? There's still quite a few comments here in the chat box where people are responding to what they're using. Yes, on budget cuts there. Here's one. How are individuals tracking demographic data of clients who pick up educational materials, for example, the grab and go that I mentioned, that are located outside physical county offices? Well, we strongly encourage our counties to make sure that there's a sign-in sheet outside along with those grab and go bags. So we're trying to encourage folks to make sure they sign those. I mean, but you're really sort of in the same situation as if it was a face-to-face. We can't force anyone to sign, and some of you have probably been like us, where some people are very hesitant because they feel as if, this is private information, and we try to explain to them that, hey, we are affiliated with USDA. This is information that we have to have. But we do try to make sure that counties are aware that they can have those sign-in sheets out by those, and we want to encourage folks to sign off. And it's not just for the demographic information, but it can also be useful when our counties want to follow up with those individuals. So they've got an email. So if they're looking low on the responses, and we can check those. Again, it's a Qualtrics link that we're using, so we can see what counties have numbers in the database, and if their numbers are low, they've got that sign-in sheet where they can follow up with some folks and say, hey, I noticed that you signed off on the product that you picked up, and just want to know if you utilize that, and if so, if you can fill out the survey. So it's useful for contact information as well as the demographic data that we need. Let's see. Okay. Diane, I see that you responded to someone there. There's one here, and I'm just jumping around, so I don't know if someone's already responded or not. It says, are you experiencing any decreases in evaluation feedback from online virtual programs? I used to get over half my evaluations completed for in-person programs, but I'm not getting even half for virtual. Because of how few I am getting, the impact is getting harder to measure. Just wondering if you have any tips.
I think some of our folks have been encountering that as well with follow-up surveys and things like that, but they've been learning very quickly to be able to use things like polls within Zoom, because I know those have been added actually to more, you have more opportunities to use them and implement them more quickly too, so they can do polls within the meeting or the lesson and grab that information quickly instead of having to follow up with an email and have them have to open the email and then open the survey and then complete the survey. So our agents have been getting pretty creative on how to get that information, because they are having that experience that you are, Lacey.
Mm-hmm.
Another tip, as far as like trying to get those evaluations back, I briefly discussed this with an agent. We haven't implemented it yet, but you could try it and see if it works. Offering some type of free PDF in return. I mean, if they do the evaluation, offering them a free PDF about the subject matter that you all discussed, something like that. I know I discussed that with the financial agent that we have, and she was sort of thinking like, hey, if we put out the survey or the evaluation and they respond to it, I could send out a budget-friendly tip sheet or something like that. So that's just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I was typing this in the chat. one tip is the tip for social media. Like a lot of people, I haven't seen a lot of extension offices like use the polling feature built into platforms like Facebook. If you upload a video, for example, you can include a poll to appear at the end of that video. So when people watch it, you can like specifically ask, do you intend to like change your behavior as a result of having watched this? That's really good information that you can collect. That's very, very simple. Not everybody's going to make it to the end of the video, and those that do might not fill out the poll, and that's okay, but at least you're giving them that option to get some data. Also, for those with Zoom webinar licenses, and I know a lot of universities now are using Zoom, I haven't seen this employed too much, but when you're using a webinar license, you can redirect your participants directly to an evaluation when they click out of, like when they leave the webinar, or when you as host like shut down the webinar. So that's another thing that you can do to kind of force people into the evaluation. I would also recommend putting the link in the chat, putting it up on the main screen. Molly said, provide time in the session for them to fill that out too. So say like, hey, everybody, go take 3 minutes to do this, and then come back and we'll follow up with something, you know, that's maybe still related to the program, but that wouldn't be evaluated, to just kind of entice them to actually go and give them that time to give you different information.
Good deal. And there was another suggestion, I think it's sort of in line with what we're talking about here. It says that my tip is to create time within the session for the evaluation. And Jenny Kokenauer, who's one of our district directors here in Kentucky, followed up on the grab and go. And she made a good point here talking about the grab and go bags that I mentioned. You know, initially it was a wide reach, if you will, you know, a lot of clientele, but then as time went on, it got more specific to certain families that were the repeats coming back, which there's still an opportunity to follow up. I mean, you know, if you've got people that are coming back, you know, week to week or however often you set the bags out, then there's probably some data there that could be gathered from those folks, because, you know, it's clear that they're finding it useful if they're returning. So thanks for sharing that, Jenny. Okay. Not seeing any additional comments in the chat there. As I mentioned, most of these are just folks offering suggestions and communicating with other folks directly here from what I'm seeing. All right, well, we want to thank our panelists for serving in this capacity. I think I've learned quite a bit. I was listening to Courtney. One of the comments that you made, Courtney, was the worst thing is not being present. And I think that is so important in times like this. I mean, you know, as I mentioned in the beginning, who knew several months ago that we would ever be in a situation where we're dealing with a pandemic? And now we had the opportunity to address that issue. And extension can be at the forefront. So I think we need to just embrace that challenge and know that we are a relevant organization. You know, that we are useful, and this is a time to shine and show that. And even though we're dealing with this right now, you know, there could be other things that may come up where extension has an opportunity. And if you look at the situation across the country right now when it comes to race relations, you know, can extension solve that? And I heard someone say the isms, if you will, racism, sexism, that in itself, or those in themselves, are pandemics. And we cannot solve that problem, but we can do what we do, and that is serve as conveners. We can create awareness. We can raise awareness. You know, we can make sure that we're recruiting individuals that can help us and serve as partners with us. So I'm just thankful that we do have these opportunities right now. We're in some tough times, don't get me wrong, but it's just another opportunity for extension to shine. And so I think you all have demonstrated that in the work that you're doing in your states, and we really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. And it's clear that you have a very strong passion about this topic as well. Evaluation is, I think people said it in so many different ways, but I always say, hey, look, if we are not evaluating our programs, it's as if that program never happened. And so we're not documenting our success, then we're already way